The air reeked of promethium and despair. Acrid smoke burned through the lungs of those unfortunate enough to call the underhive of Necromunda home. Manufactorum waste seeped through cracked pipes overhead, dripping viscous fluid that burned skin and corroded metal alike. In the distance, gunfire erupted, a common melody in this forsaken place where gangs warred for territory and survival. Amid this industrial hell, reality tore. A wound in the fabric of the materium split open, its edges crackling with otherworldly energy that defied the laws of nature. The air shimmered with heat as something was thrust through, a figure hurled from one realm to another. The rift snapped shut with a thunderous crack, leaving only a lone form sprawled on the filth-slick ground. The man lay motionless for several seconds, his white hair matted with grime, his red leather coat splayed around him like spilled blood. His eyes snapped open, revealing an unnatural clarity that cut through the murk of the underhive. With a groan, he pushed himself upright, one hand instinctively reaching for the massive sword strapped to his back. "Talk about a rough landing," Dante muttered, rising to his full height. He rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and surveyed the alien landscape of industrial decay. Not exactly five-star accommodations. He had survived worse. Far worse. Dante reached out with senses beyond the physical, feeling the strange currents of power that flowed through this place. The energy was familiar yet distorted, like encountering a twisted reflection of something once known. It was demonic in nature, but warped, amplified, as if the very foundations of this reality were saturated with infernal potential. "Well?" he said to no one, a slight smirk forming on his face as he adjusted his coat. "When in Rome." 3 levels above, Inquisitor Horatio Cerelius reviewed the reports with growing concern. The Auspex readings were unprecedented. A massive spike in warp energy had registered in the lower hive, an energy signature unlike any recorded in Imperial archives. It bore similarities to demonic manifestation, but with peculiar variations that suggested something new, something dangerous. "Prepare a kill team," he ordered, his augmetic eye whirring as it adjusted focus. "Full sanctioned psycho support. Whatever breached into the materium must not be allowed to establish a foothold." His aide, a gaunt woman with more mechanical parts than flesh, bowed stiffly. "The local Arbites have already dispatched patrols to the area, Lord Inquisitor. Initial Vox reports describe a humanoid entity in red." Cerelius slid his bolt pistol from its holster, checking its sacred machine spirit with practiced efficiency. The ruinous powers are ever creative in their manifestations. This could be a harbinger of a greater incursion. In the darkness below, Dante moved with predatory grace. The architecture of this place was hauntingly familiar in its Gothic excess, yet alien in its sheer scale and industrial brutality. He had navigated demon-infested castles, hellish dimensions, and corrupted cities, but this place held a different kind of wrongness. It wasn't just corrupted, it was built wrong from the start, designed to crush the human spirit beneath the weight of machinery and dogma. He paused at an intersection where human remains had been arranged in a crude circle. Candles made from human fat flickered around the perimeter, and strange symbols had been painted in blood on the metal walls. Dante recognized invocations to powers beyond mortal comprehension, calls to entities of chaos and destruction. "Amateur hour," he mused, kicking over one of the candles. "Whoever did this interior decorating needs a new hobby." The shadows behind him shifted. Dante did not turn, did not acknowledge the movement, but his muscles tensed imperceptibly. 3, 6, 9 figures emerging from hidden alcoves and maintenance ducts. They wore patchwork armor cobbled together from scavenged materials, their flesh marked with self-inflicted scars, forming crude approximations of the same symbols that adorned the walls. "The sacrifice," one of them hissed, voice distorted by ritual mutilation of the vocal cords. "The Lord of Change demands blood." Dante turned slowly, his expression one of theatrical boredom. "Sorry to disappoint, but I'm not on the menu, though I'm always up for a party." The cultists advanced, revealed now in the dim light of the remaining candles. Some clutched rusted blades, others held primitive firearms. All bore the marks of corruption, their bodies twisted by exposure to energies mankind was never meant to harness. Eyes that glowed with unnatural light fixed on Dante with religious fervor. "The breach brought you to us," the apparent leader said, a tall figure whose face was hidden behind a mask fashioned from human skin. "Your essence will feed the ascension." Dante's hands moved with blinding speed. Twin pistols, black and white, materialized in his grip, seemingly pulled from nowhere. Ebony, ivory. He addressed the weapons with casual familiarity. "Let's show these guys how we RSVP to unwanted invitations." The first shots echoed through the chamber with thunderous force. Bullets tore through the nearest cultists with impossible precision, each finding a vital organ or the center of a forehead. 3 bodies dropped before the others could react. When they did, it was with howls of rage rather than fear. They rushed him as one, a wave of corrupted flesh and rusted metal. Dante moved like water, flowing between their attacks with inhuman grace. He fired continuously, each shot finding its mark, yet some of the cultists shrugged off wounds that should have been fatal. Their flesh knitted together before his eyes, warp energy sustaining them beyond mortal limits. "Interesting trick," Dante acknowledged, holstering his pistols as the last bullets found their marks. The remaining cultists closed in, 5 of them now, their bodies pulsing with unnatural vitality. Rebellion, his massive sword, cleared its sheath with a sound like tearing reality. The blade caught the dim light, seeming to drink it in rather than reflect it. Dante's smile widened. "Let's try this instead." The first swing cleaved through 2 cultists at once, the blade passing through corrupted flesh and bone as if they were mist. The power behind the strike sent their remains flying against the far wall with enough force to dent the metal. The leader lunged with a ceremonial dagger, its edge glowing with sickly power. Dante sidestepped, bringing Rebellion down in an overhead strike that split the cultist from crown to groin in a single, fluid motion. The last 2 hesitated, witnessing power beyond their comprehension. It was all the opening Dante needed. He closed the distance between them in a blur of motion, Rebellion tracing a figure-8 pattern that separated limbs from torsos with surgical precision. As the echoes of combat faded, Dante flicked blood from his blade with practiced ease. "Not much of a welcome committee," he observed, scanning the chamber for additional threats. Finding none, he approached the ritual circle for closer inspection. The symbols were familiar variations on themes he had encountered before, calls to entities of destruction and change. But there was something different about them, something more potent. In this reality, these powers seemed closer to the surface, more readily accessible, more dangerous. A distant wail of sirens reached his ears, growing steadily closer. "Sounds like the local authorities," Dante mused. "Might be time for a change of scenery." He turned to leave, then paused, his supernatural senses detecting a new presence. Not like the cultists, something older, more refined in its corruption. The air temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on the metal surfaces around him. The candles still burning around the ritual circle flared suddenly, their flames turning an unnatural blue. "Now that feels more like home," Dante said, rotating slowly to face the new threat. The daemon materialized gradually, its form coalescing from the shadows themselves. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body a twisted amalgamation of avian and humanoid features. Feathers like blades of obsidian covered its form, and its head bore a beaked mask of impossible geometry. In one hand it carried a staff topped with a constantly shifting symbol that hurt the eyes to observe directly. "Interesting," it said, its voice resonating on multiple frequencies simultaneously. "You are not of this reality, yet you bear the taint of the warp. A curious anomaly." Dante raised an eyebrow. "I've been called worse." "And you are?" "I am Krajan, herald of secrets, keeper of forbidden knowledge," the entity replied, circling Dante with predatory interest. "Your arrival was foreseen, though your nature remains unclear. I get that a lot, Dante said, keeping rebellion at the ready. Look, I'm all for chit-chat, but if you're planning to attack, can we skip to that part? I've got places to be, dimensions to return to. The daemon's laughter was like glass breaking inside the mind. You misunderstand your position, anomaly. You have not merely crossed space but realities. The paths between are sealed to one such as you. You are trapped here, in this dying empire of mankind. Dante's expression hardened, though the confident smile never fully left his face. Wouldn't be the first time I've been told that. Rarely sticks. Krasin extended a talon-like hand. Serve me, and I shall unravel the secrets of your displacement. Resist, and join the endless ranks of souls lost to the warp. Yeah, service industry isn't really my thing, Dante replied, shifting his weight to a combat stance. I'm more of a freelancer. The daemon's response was immediate and violent. It launched forward with impossible speed, its staff sweeping in an arc that left trails of warp fire in its wake. Dante met the attack with rebellion, the two weapons connecting with a force that shattered the remaining candles and sent a shockwave through the chamber. The strength behind the daemon's blow was immense, driving Dante back several steps. He recovered instantly, countering with a series of strikes that would have dismembered any mortal opponent. Krasin parried each with fluid grace, its movements belying its massive form. You fight well for a half-breed, the daemon observed, genuine curiosity in its inhuman voice. Your blood sings with power akin to our own, yet there is something different. What manner of creature are you? Dante answered with action rather than words. He feinted with rebellion, then drew ebony with his free hand, firing point-blank at the daemon's masked face. The bullet struck true, but seemed to pass through the entity like smoke, leaving no mark. Conventional weapons cannot harm me in this realm, Krasin mocked. I am ascendant here. Let's test that theory, Dante replied, holstering the pistol and gripping rebellion with both hands. The sword began to glow with internal energy, responding to its wielder's will. Dante channeled his demonic heritage into the blade, transforming it from merely exceptional steel into a conduit for power beyond mortal understanding. When he struck again, the difference was immediate and dramatic. Rebellion carved through the daemon's defenses, drawing a line of ethereal fire across its chest. Krasin shrieked in genuine pain and surprise, retreating several steps as ichor that seemed to defy physical laws dripped from the wound. Impossible, it hissed, its form fluctuating slightly, reality struggling to contain its true nature. What power is this? Dante pressed his advantage, unleashing a barrage of strikes that forced the daemon further back. Each impact of his empowered blade sent sparks of conflicting energies cascading across the chamber. The walls themselves began to warp and buckle under the strain of containing such power. Just a little family heirloom, Dante said, his voice tight with exertion despite his casual words. My father was big on passing down traditions. Krasin abandoned defense for offense, lashing out with sorcerous energies that manifested as chains of blue lightning. They wrapped around Dante's sword arm, searing through his coat and into the flesh beneath. The pain was intense, but Dante had endured worse, much worse. With a grunt of effort, he pulled against the magical bindings, his own demonic power flaring to counter the daemon's sorcery. The conflicting energies created a cascading reaction. The ritual circle beneath their feet ignited with power never intended by its creators, feeding on the clash of otherworldly forces. The entire chamber began to shake violently, support structures groaning under impossible stresses. This vessel cannot contain our battle, Krasin warned, its confidence replaced by genuine concern. You will destroy this entire sector with your recklessness. Wouldn't be the first time I've brought the house down, Dante replied, though he too recognized the danger. The energies they were unleashing were highly unstable, especially in this strange reality where the barriers between dimensions seemed thinner. Above them, Heavy footfalls announced the arrival of armored figures. Beams of light cut through the smoke and dust, illuminating the confrontation below. Voices barked orders in a harsh, unfamiliar language that nevertheless carried the unmistakable tone of military authority. "Looks like we've got company," Dante observed, not taking his eyes off the daemon. Kragen's form began to dissolve at the edges, pulling back into the warp. "We shall continue this dance another time, Anomaly. Your presence here has already set greater wheels in motion. The change you bring cannot be undone." Before Dante could respond, the daemon collapsed into itself, vanishing with a thunderclap of imploding air that staggered even him. The ritual circle flared one final time, then went dark, leaving only scorched metal where the intricate symbols had been. Dante turned toward the new arrivals, rebellion still humming with power in his grip. The smoke cleared enough to reveal figures in heavy carapace armor, their weapons trained on him with unwavering precision. At their center stood a tall man in an ornate coat, his left eye replaced by a mechanical device that whirred as it focused. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind," Inquisitor Ceralius declared, his bolt pistol leveled at Dante's head, "you will surrender for examination and judgment." Dante assessed the situation with the rapid calculation of one who had faced impossible odds countless times before. These were not demons, not in the traditional sense, though he sensed something off about them. They were human, mostly, and he had no quarrel with them. With a theatrical gesture, he sheathed rebellion on his back. "Sorry about the mess," he said, gesturing to the destruction around them. "Had a little disagreement with the previous tenant. Big guy, feathers, bad attitude." The Inquisitor's expression remained impassive. "You will come with us willingly or by force. The choice is yours, but be aware that resistance will be considered confirmation of heretical intent." Dante spread his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "Well, when you put it like that, how can I refuse such a charming invitation?" Two Arbites moved forward with restraints, while others maintained their aim on the white-haired stranger. Ceralius watched with calculated intensity, his augmetic eye recording every detail of this anomaly for later analysis. The readings from his wrist auspex were confounding. The being before him registered as simultaneously human and something else, something that caused the device's machine spirit to offer contradictory classifications. As the first Arbite approached, Dante allowed himself to be secured, though his relaxed posture and amused expression made it clear this was his choice rather than their victory. The second Arbite moved to take his weapons, reaching first for rebellion. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Dante advised casually. "She doesn't play well with strangers." The Arbite hesitated, looking to Ceralius for direction. The Inquisitor nodded curtly. "Take the weapons, all of them." As the Arbite's hand closed around Rebellion's hilt, a surge of energy coursed through the connection. The man screamed, his body convulsing as power beyond his comprehension flowed into him. He collapsed, smoke rising from his armored gauntlets. "Told you," Dante said with a shrug. Ceralius raised his hand, halting the other Arbites who had tensed to fire. "The weapons remain with him for now," he decided, his voice cold with calculation rather than mercy. "We will deal with them under more controlled conditions." Dante was led through the twisted corridors of the Underhive, flanked by grim-faced enforcers whose tension was palpable even through their armor. Above, the vaulted ceilings of the hive stretched beyond sight, lost in the perpetual smog. Below, the depths promised only greater darkness and corruption. "Not to be a backseat driver," Dante said conversationally as they marched, "but if you're looking for the express route out of this dump, I think you took a wrong turn 3 intersections back." Ceralius, walking several paces ahead, did not turn. "We are not leaving the Underhive. Not yet. There are questions that require answers, and you will provide them." "Sounds ominous," Dante replied, undaunted. "Let me guess, this isn't heading toward a surprise birthday party." The procession halted before a massive bulkhead door emblazoned with the symbol of the Inquisition. Servitors, more machine than human, worked the ancient mechanisms that sealed this sanctified space from the corruption beyond. As the doors ground open with the protest of metal that had endured centuries of service, Dante peered into the chamber beyond. It was a temporary outpost, clearly, but established with thorough efficiency. Cogitators hummed along one wall, tended by red-robed tech priests whose mechadendrites danced across interfaces with inhuman precision. Armed guards stood at intervals, their weapons never wavering from their positions of readiness. At the center, a chair of crude but effective design waited, equipped with restraints and surrounded by arcane devices whose purpose was clear even to one unfamiliar with their specific form. "Interrogation," Dante observed, his tone still light but with an edge of steel beneath. "And here I thought we were getting along so well." Cerelius finally turned to face him directly. "You were discovered at the site of a known warp incursion, engaged with a daemon entity, wielding weapons of unknown origin and power. Your very presence registers as a corruption in the fabric of the materium. What response did you expect, creature?" Dante met the Inquisitor's gaze unflinchingly. "In my experience, a thank you is customary when someone deals with your daemon problem, but I guess customer service standards vary by dimension." "Secure him," Cerelius ordered, gesturing toward the chair. As the Arbites moved to comply, the lights throughout the chamber flickered. The tech priests paused in their rituals, heads tilting in unified confusion. A low, rhythmic thumping began to resonate through the metal floor, growing steadily in intensity. "Your reinforcements?" Dante asked Cerelius, though he already suspected the answer. The Inquisitor's expression darkened. "Silence," he commanded, activating his Vox unit. "All units, report status." The only response was static, punctuated by what might have been screams in the distance. The thumping grew louder, now clearly recognizable as massive footsteps approaching with deliberate, inexorable purpose. Cerelius drew his bolt pistol once more. "Battle stations," he ordered. "Prepare for possible warp entity breach." Dante sighed dramatically. "You know, if you'd just asked nicely, I could have told you those cultists probably had friends. Big, angry friends who don't take kindly to party crashers." The bulkhead that had sealed behind them buckled inward with a screech of protesting metal. A second impact dented it further, the reinforced door beginning to fail under impossible strength. The third blow tore it from its moorings entirely, sending the massive barrier crashing into the chamber. Standing in the ruined entryway was a monster that dwarfed even the daemon Dante had faced earlier. Its form was vaguely humanoid but grotesquely distorted, muscle and sinew bulging beyond anatomical possibility. Its skin was the color of bruised flesh, covered in Baroque symbols that writhed across the surface as if alive. A head that was more bestial than human surveyed the chamber with eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. "Bloodthirster," one of the tech priests whispered, the word laden with fear even through his Vox-modulated voice. "Greater Daemon of Khorne," Cerelius confirmed grimly. "All personnel, enact Banishment Protocol Epsilon. Purge the cogitators and prepare the sanctified charges." Dante assessed the newcomer with professional interest. "Let me guess," he said to no one in particular. "Anger management issues, probably compensating for something with that size. Definitely not here for peaceful negotiations." The daemon's roar shook the very foundations of the chamber, dust and debris raining from the ceiling as ancient support struts protested the sonic assault. With a speed belying its massive bulk, it charged into the chamber, a massive axe materializing in its grip from streams of blood that flowed from its own flesh. The Arbites opened fire as one, a fusillade of las bolts and solid slugs impacting the daemon's hide with minimal effect. Where they did penetrate, the wounds sealed almost instantly, warp energy knitting corrupted flesh with contemptuous ease. Cerelius fired his bolt pistol with practiced precision, each mass-reactive round finding a vital point that would have felled any mortal creature. Against the bloodthirster, they were mere irritants, drawing its attention rather than slowing its advance. The daemon swung its axe in a horizontal arc that threatened to bisect half the chamber's defenders in a single blow. Those too slow to duck or dive aside were cut down, their armor offering no more protection than parchment against the warp-forged weapon. "I'm going to consider those restraints optional at this point," Dante announced, his hands already free, though he had not visibly struggled against them. He rolled his shoulders casually, as if preparing for nothing more strenuous than a morning stretch. Aurelius, diving behind a cogitator bank for momentary cover, had no opportunity to object. The daemon was carving through his forces with brutal efficiency, each swing of its axe claiming multiple lives. The tech priests were frantically working to enact whatever banishment protocol had been referenced, but it was clear they would not complete their task in time. Dante stepped forward, directly into the path of the rampaging daemon. "Hey, Big Red," he called out, his voice cutting through the chaos with supernatural clarity. "Why don't you pick on someone your own size, or at least someone in your weight class?" The bloodthirster paused in its slaughter, blood-slick head swiveling to focus on this new challenger. Its eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring as it scented something unusual, something that did not belong in this reality. With another earth-shaking roar, it charged toward Dante, axe raised high for a killing blow. Dante waited until the last possible moment before moving. Not a dodge, not a retreat, but a leap directly toward the attacking daemon. He sailed through the air with impossible grace, clearing the axe's arc and landing on the demon's massive forearm. From this precarious perch, he ran up the limb toward the creature's head, drawing rebellion as he went. The bloodthirster bellowed in rage, trying to dislodge this impudent insect with violent shakes of its arm. Dante maintained his balance effortlessly, as if gravity itself bent to his will. When he reached the daemon's shoulder, he launched himself higher still, rebellion held in both hands above his head. "Going down," Dante quipped, as he brought the massive sword down with all his strength, directly into the junction between the daemon's neck and shoulder. Rebellion bit deep, far deeper than any mortal weapon should have penetrated demonic flesh. The bloodthirster's roar transformed into a shriek of genuine pain as black ichor erupted from the wound in a pressurized spray. It reached for Dante with its free hand, massive talons seeking to crush this unexpected threat. Dante abandoned his position, kicking off from the daemon's body and backflipping through the air to land in a perfect three-point stance several meters away. He rose slowly, rebellion resting casually on his shoulder despite the ichor that now coated its length. "That got your attention," he observed, a challenging grin spreading across his face. "Want to try that again, or should I pencil you in for a second appointment?" The bloodthirster's response was a bellow of pure hatred. It charged again, but with more caution this time, its axe held defensively across its body. This was no mindless berserker, despite its allegiance to the blood god. It recognized a genuine threat when it encountered one. Aurelius watched from cover, his augmetic eye recording everything while his human one struggled to process what he was seeing. The stranger moved like no human he had ever witnessed, with a speed and grace that bordered on the impossible. More concerning still was the effect his weapon had on the daemon. Wounds inflicted by mortal weapons, even those blessed by the ecclesiarchy, typically closed rapidly on creatures of such power. The gash left by the red-coated figure's sword continued to bleed freely, showing no signs of supernatural healing. "Throne of Terror," the Inquisitor whispered, "what manner of being are you?" Dante and the bloodthirster circled each other in the center of the chamber, other combatants forgotten in this clash of otherworldly powers. The daemon probed with quick strikes of its axe, testing Dante's defenses rather than committing to all-out attack. Dante parried each blow with precision, the impact of the massive weapon against his sword sending shockwaves through the chamber that cracked cogitator screens and knocked the unwary from their feet. "Is this really the best you can do?" Dante taunted, his breathing still even, his movements fluid and unhampered. "I've fought garden gnomes with more punch." The daemon responded with a complex series of attacks, its axe a blur of motion as it sought to overwhelm its opponent through sheer speed and ferocity. Dante matched it move for move, rebellion singing through the air as it intercepted each strike. Sparks cascaded around them with each impact, the conflicting energies of their weapons creating miniature lightning storms in the enclosed space. For nearly a minute they fought this way, neither gaining a decisive advantage. Then, sensing a momentary opening, Dante went on the offensive. He ducked under a horizontal swing and surged forward, rebellion tracing a silver arc that opened a second wound across the daemon's torso. Before it could counter, Dante was inside its guard, his free hand driving upward in a palm strike that connected with the creature's jaw with enough force to snap its head back. Staggered, the bloodthirster took 2 steps backward, its hooved feet crushing debris and fallen bodies alike. It shook its massive head, disoriented not just by the force of the blow but by the nature of the energy behind it. This was no mortal it faced, nor a servant of the rival chaos gods. This was something new, something that did not belong in the careful balance of power that defined this reality. "Enough games," it growled, its voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "Your soul will adorn the skull throne, anomaly." The daemon's form began to shimmer, warp energy coalescing around it in a crimson aura that hurt the eyes to observe directly. It was drawing deeply on the powers of the warp, channeling energies that threatened to tear apart the thin veil between dimensions. Dante recognized the danger immediately. He said, his casual tone belied by the sudden tension in his stance. "If you're powering up, only fair I return the favor." He closed his eyes for a brief moment, reaching inward to the core of his being where his demonic heritage resided. In this strange reality, that power responded differently, resonating with the ambient energies of what the locals called the warp. It rose within him like a tide, transforming him from within. Cerelius and the surviving defenders watched in horror as the stranger's form began to change. His skin hardened, taking on a scaled, armored appearance. The white hair rose as if caught in an otherworldly wind, stiffening into a crown-like formation. Most dramatic of all, wings erupted from his back, tearing through his coat in an explosion of crimson leather and ethereal energy. "Devil Trigger," Dante announced, his voice now carrying a harmonic resonance that echoed through multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Let's dance." The transformed Dante moved with blinding speed, crossing the distance to the bloodthirster before the daemon could complete its own transformation. Rebellion, now glowing with power that matched its wielder's demonic form, struck with the force of a thunderbolt. The blow severed the daemon's axe arm at the elbow, sending the limb and weapon crashing to the floor where they began to dissolve into streams of blood and energy. The bloodthirster howled in agony and rage, black ichor pumping from the stump in rhythmic gouts. It lashed out with its remaining arm, catching Dante in a glancing blow that would have pulverized any mortal. Even in his empowered state, the impact sent him flying across the chamber, crashing through a cogitator bank before coming to rest against the far wall. Dante rose immediately, shaking off debris with a roll of his shoulders. "Now that's more like it," he said, genuine excitement in his transformed voice. Finally, a workout worth breaking a sweat for. The daemon charged, its remaining arm extended like a battering ram. Dante met the charge head-on, rebellion held before him like a lance. The collision of powers sent a shockwave through the chamber powerful enough to buckle support columns and send cracks racing across the reinforced ceiling. For several seconds they remained locked together, neither yielding, the conflicting energies of their beings creating a vortex of power that began to warp the physical structure of the chamber itself. Metal supports twisted into impossible shapes. Gravity fluctuated, causing loose objects to float momentarily before crashing down again. The very air seemed to thicken, becoming difficult to breathe for the mortal witnesses. "This ends now," Dante declared, breaking the deadlock with a sudden twist of his body. Rebellion slid along the daemon's arm, opening a deep furrow in its corrupted flesh before finding purchase in its chest. With a final surge of power, Dante drove the blade home, piercing the core of the demonic entity. The bloodthirster convulsed, its form beginning to lose cohesion as the connection to its warp essence was severed. It made one last attempt to strike, its massive jaws snapping at Dante's head. Dante responded by twisting rebellion and channeling a final surge of power through the blade. The daemon exploded in a cataclysm of warp energy, its physical form unable to contain the conflicting powers that raged within it. The blast threw everyone in the chamber off their feet, extinguished all illumination, and sent structural alarms blaring throughout the sector. As emergency lumens sputtered to life, casting weak, intermittent light across the devastation, Aurelius struggled to his feet. His uniform was torn and bloodied, his augmetic eye damaged but still functional. He surveyed the chamber, noting the massive structural damage and the scattered remains of his team. Of the daemon, there was no sign beyond a large scorched area at the center of the room. Standing at the epicenter of the destruction was Dante, his form having reverted to its human appearance. His coat was in tatters, his white hair singed at the edges, but he stood straight and undefeated, rebellion resting point down before him like the sword of some ancient knight. "Well," Dante said, breaking the stunned silence. "That was bracing." Aurelius approached cautiously, his bolt pistol held at his side rather than aimed. "What are you?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the acrid smoke that filled the chamber. Dante considered the question, then shrugged. "Just a guy who kills demons for a living, though I usually get paid for it. Speaking of which, what's the going rate for bloodthirster removal in these parts?" The Inquisitor's expression remained stern, but something had changed in his assessment of the stranger. "You destroyed a greater daemon of Khorne with minimal support. Such a feat is beyond the capabilities of most Astartes battle brothers, let alone a single human." "Who said I was human?" Dante replied with a wink. "At least, not entirely." Before Aurelius could respond, his Vox unit crackled to life with urgent reports. Multiple demonic incursions were being reported throughout the Underhive. The Bloodthirster had not been alone, merely the vanguard of a more significant warp breach. "You have two choices," Aurelius told Dante, his tone brooking no argument despite the shifted power dynamics between them. "Aid us in containing this incursion, or face immediate execution as a potential warp entity." Dante raised an eyebrow. "Has anyone ever told you that your negotiation skills need work?" He sighed dramatically, then sheathed rebellion on his back. "But I suppose daemon slaying is what I do best, regardless of the dimension. Point me at the problem, Inquisitor." Aurelius nodded curtly, activating his Vox unit to coordinate the response. "The primary breach appears to be 3 sectors down, in what was once a promethium refinery. The local Arbites are being overwhelmed. Whatever you are, whatever power you wield, we need it now." "Just another day at the office," Dante replied, rolling his shoulders. "Lead the way." The journey through the Underhive was a descent into escalating chaos. Emergency klaxons wailed throughout the metal corridors, their urgent cries punctuated by distant gunfire and screams. Evacuating civilians pushed past them in panic, their faces masks of terror. Many bore wounds, physical or psychological, that spoke of horrors recently witnessed. Dante moved with confident strides alongside Aurelius, who had assembled what remained of his forces into a makeshift strike team. The Inquisitor maintained a rigid facade, but Dante detected the subtle signs of strain. The man was facing an incursion beyond his resources, yet duty compelled him forward regardless of personal cost. "So," Dante began conversationally as they navigated a particularly narrow passageway, "these demons, they show up often around here?" Aurelius's jaw tightened. "Demonic incursions of this magnitude are rare, even in the Underhive. Something has weakened the veil between realium and immaterium. Something like you, perhaps." "Me?" Dante placed a hand over his heart in mock offense. "I'm usually closing hellgates, not opening them. Though I'll admit, interdimensional travel isn't exactly my specialty." Their exchange was cut short as they emerged onto a broad thoroughfare that offered a direct view of their destination. The Promethium refinery loomed ahead, a massive industrial complex of towering columns and tangled pipework. Once a critical infrastructure node, Now it stood as a gateway to hell itself. The air around the facility shimmered with unnatural heat, creating a mirage-like distortion that bent light and warped perception. Streams of energy coalesced and dispersed in patterns that defied physical laws. At the center of the complex, a pillar of crimson light erupted skyward, punching through multiple levels of the hive's superstructure toward the distant, unseen sky. That, Dante observed, is definitely not standard industrial operation. Scattered across the approaches to the refinery were the remains of the initial response force. Arbeit's vehicles lay shattered and burning, their armored hulls torn open like paper. Bodies in carapace armor were strewn about, many dismembered or displaying wounds that defied conventional weaponry. Aurelius surveyed the carnage with grim determination. The refinery connects to the primary Prometheum distribution network for this entire hive spire. If the daemons gain control of it... Boom, Dante finished for him. I get the picture. Big explosion, lots of casualties, probably a few orphans. Standard Tuesday for you folks, I'm guessing. The Inquisitor shot him a cold glare. This is not a matter for levity, creature. Billions of souls depend on our success. Dante's expression sobered slightly. Trust me, Inquisitor. I know exactly how high the stakes are. I just find it easier to work with a smile than a grimace. They advanced cautiously toward the refinery perimeter, using the scattered wreckage as cover. Aurelius's remaining troops, a mix of Arbates and his own inquisitorial stormtroopers, moved with disciplined precision despite their depleted numbers. As they approached, they encountered the first wave of resistance. They were human once, or something close to it. Now they were vessels for warp corruption, their flesh twisted into new and horrific forms. Some bore additional limbs that ended in bony blades or pincerous claws. Others had skin that rippled with unnatural musculature or was stretched tight over grotesquely enlarged skulls. All moved with the jerky, uncoordinated motion of puppets controlled by entities with no understanding of human anatomy. Possessed. Aurelius spat the word like a curse. The cultists have given themselves to the warp. Bad career move, Dante commented, drawing ebony and ivory. Let me handle the welcome party. Before Aurelius could object, Dante was in motion. He crossed the distance to the first wave of possessed with supernatural speed, his twin pistols barking in a rhythmic percussion that sent blessed ammunition tearing through corrupted flesh. Where the Arbates had struggled to put down even single possessed with sustained fire, Dante's bullets found vital points with unerring accuracy, dropping the warped humans with efficiency that bordered on artistry. He moved through their ranks like a dancer, each step precisely calculated, each shot finding its mark. When they closed to melee range, he seamlessly transitioned to hand-to-hand combat, his movements too fast for mortal eyes to track clearly. Limbs were severed, throats crushed, spines broken with casual brutality that nonetheless contained an element of mercy. These were no longer humans but suffering vessels for entities that cared nothing for their pain. Aurelius and his forces advanced in Dante's wake, securing the ground he cleared. The Inquisitor's assessment of the white-haired stranger evolved with each display of superhuman prowess. This was no ordinary abhuman, no simple mutant. The power he wielded was comparable to that of the Adeptus Astartes, perhaps even greater in some respects. As they reached the main entrance to the refinery complex, a new threat emerged. The massive adamantium doors, designed to contain catastrophic industrial accidents, bulged outward as if under immense pressure. Metal groaned and rivets popped like gunshots as something massive pushed from within. Back, Dante warned, sensing the scale of the approaching threat. This one's mine. The doors exploded outward, reduced to shrapnel by the force behind them. Through the smoking breach emerged a demon of such monstrous proportions that it dwarfed even the bloodthirster Dante had fought earlier. Its form was a grotesque amalgamation of machinery and flesh, as if the industrial equipment of the refinery had been absorbed into daemonic matter. Pistons pumped like muscles between plates of living metal. Furnace fires burned in eye sockets that held malevolent intelligence. Great unclean one, one of the stormtroopers whispered, the horror in his voice palpable even through his Vox unit. Incorrect classification, Sorelius corrected sharply. This is something else. A hybrid manifestation drawing on multiple chaos powers. Dante assessed the monstrosity with professional interest. Big, ugly, probably has anger issues and a god complex. Details change, but demons are demons in any reality. The daemon fixed its furnace gaze on Dante, recognition flickering in those burning depths. The anomaly, it rumbled. Its voice the sound of metal being torn and industrial machinery grinding to catastrophic failure. The Breachwalker. The Harbinger. I've been called worse, Dante replied, drawing rebellion. Though I prefer Dante, or the guy who's about to send you back to whatever hell you crawled out of. The daemon's laughter was the sound of exploding boilers and shattering glass. You understand nothing, Breachwalker. Your arrival was the key that unlocked the door. Your blood calls to blood across realities. Dante's expression hardened, the casual humor fading. If you're saying I'm responsible for this party, I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just a tourist passing through. The blood of Sparda flows in your veins, the daemon continued, stretching to its full height, which nearly reached the vaulted ceiling 30 meters above. The blood of a traitor to his kind, who sealed away what was rightfully ours. Now you have come to us, when the stars align and the veil thins. Your presence is the catalyst. The name struck Dante like a physical blow. His father was unknown in this reality, yet this creature spoke the name with ancient hatred. How do you know that name? He demanded, all pretense of nonchalance gone. The daemon's body shuddered, plates of metal grinding against each other as it prepared to attack. The dark gods know all bloodlines, across all realities. The sons of traitors are especially sweet sacrifices. With that, it charged, moving with impossible speed for something of its size. Massive fists, each larger than a man, descended toward Dante with force enough to shatter reinforced ferrocrete. Dante met the charge with his own supernatural speed, rebellion flashing in the industrial lighting as he evaded the first blow and countered with a strike to the daemon's forearm. The blade bit deep, drawing a spray of ichor that sizzled and burned where it touched the floor. The daemon bellowed in pain and rage, its counterattack a wild sweep that forced Dante to leap high into the air to avoid being crushed. He used the momentum to his advantage, landing on the creature's massive shoulder and driving rebellion down into the junction where flesh met metal. If you know my father's name, Dante growled as he twisted the blade, then you know what I can do to your kind. The daemon thrashed violently, nearly dislodging him. One massive hand reached up, trying to pluck him from his perch. Dante abandoned his position, kicking off and executing a perfect backflip that carried him to a catwalk 20 meters away. The metal platform groaned under the sudden impact but held. From this elevated position, Dante drew ebony and ivory, unleashing a barrage of fire aimed at the daemon's eyes. The bullets found their mark with supernatural accuracy, exploding within those furnace pits and temporarily blinding the monstrous entity. Blinded and enraged, the daemon lashed out indiscriminately, smashing support columns and processing equipment with equal abandon. Alarms blared as pressure gauges spiked into critical ranges. Warning klaxons announced containment failures throughout the facility. It's going to bring down the entire complex, Sorelius shouted over the cacophony of destruction. The Prometheum reserves will detonate. Dante assessed the situation with lightning speed. The daemon was too large, too powerful to be defeated quickly through conventional means, even with his abilities, and time was clearly running out. Keep your men back, he called down to Sorelius. I'm going to try something dramatic. Without waiting for a response, Dante leapt from the catwalk, his form blurring as he activated his devil trigger once more. The transformation was even more pronounced this time, his demonic heritage resonating with the warp energies that saturated this reality. Wings of crimson energy unfurled from his back, and his entire body took on the aspect of ancient, terrible power that echoed his father's legacy. He descended upon the daemon like a vengeful angel, rebellion leaving trails of energy in its wake as he struck with the full force of his empowered state. The blade sank deep into the daemon's core, where flesh and machine fused in unholy union. The daemon roared, the sound threatening to rupture eardrums even through protective gear. It reached for Dante with both massive hands, attempting to crush him against its body. Dante held his ground, forcing rebellion deeper still, channeling his power through the blade into the very heart of the monstrosity. "You want a sacrifice?" Dante snarled, his transformed voice resonating on multiple frequencies. "Try this." With a final surge of effort, he unleashed the full potential of his demonic heritage, not as a controlled manifestation but as raw, unfiltered power. Energy exploded outward from the point where rebellion impaled the daemon, cascading through its monstrous form in waves of destructive force. The daemon's body began to break apart, not returning to the warp but being consumed by power that was simultaneously familiar and alien to it. As the creature's form disintegrated, a shock wave of energy radiated outward, washing over the entire facility. "Fall back," Cerelius ordered, recognizing imminent catastrophe. "All forces, emergency evacuation." The Inquisitor's troops needed no encouragement. They retreated at full speed, dragging wounded comrades and abandoning equipment in their desperate flight from the refinery complex. Cerelius himself lingered at the threshold, his augmetic eye fixed on the supernatural confrontation unfolding before him. At the epicenter, Dante maintained his grip on rebellion, even as the energies he had unleashed threatened to consume him as well. The daemon was nearly gone, its form reduced to fragmenting pieces that dissolved into the ether. But the chain reaction had begun. Pressure vessels ruptured, containment fields failed, promethium reserves ignited. The first explosion came from deep within the facility, a thunderous detonation that sent tremors through the entire sector. Secondary explosions followed in rapid succession, each more powerful than the last as the chain reaction spread through the complex's infrastructure. Dante, sensing the imminent destruction, finally released his hold on the dissolving daemon and focused his remaining power on escape. With a massive beat of his energy wings, he propelled himself toward the exit at supernatural speed, just as the main promethium reservoir reached critical failure. The explosion that followed was visible from orbit. A column of fire erupted from the underhive, punching through multiple levels of the vast city structure and temporarily illuminating the perpetually smog-choked sky of Necromunda. The shockwave flattened structures for kilometers in every direction, killing thousands instantly and leaving countless more wounded or trapped in the resulting devastation. 3 kilometers from the epicenter, in a reinforced Arbates bunker that had weathered the worst of the blast, Inquisitor Cerelius tended to the wounded with grim efficiency. His uniform was in tatters, his mechanical eye sparking intermittently, but his purpose remained unshaken. When the blast doors ground open to admit a final straggler, he turned with pistol raised, taking no chances in the aftermath of such corruption. Dante stumbled in, his coat reduced to shreds, his white hair singed and darkened with soot. Rebellion remained strapped to his back, seemingly unharmed despite the cataclysm. He offered a weary smile to the assembled survivors. "Did I miss anything?" he asked, his voice hoarse but unbroken. Cerelius lowered his weapon slowly. "The daemon?" "Toast," Dante confirmed, dropping heavily onto a supply crate. "Along with most of your industrial infrastructure, from the looks of it. Sorry about that. Collateral damage isn't usually my style, but options were limited." The Inquisitor studied him with calculating intensity. "The warp readings are stabilizing. Whatever breach existed appears to be sealing itself naturally without the daemon's presence to maintain it." "Good news, then," Dante said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Crisis averted, world saved, only moderate apocalyptic destruction. I'd call that a win." Cerelius was not so easily satisfied. "The daemon spoke of your blood, your lineage. It claimed your very presence was the catalyst for the incursion." Dante's expression sobered. "Yeah, about that. Where I come from, my family has a complicated history with the demon world." Seems some grudges transcend dimensional boundaries. You claim to be a daemon hunter, yet you wield powers akin to the very entities you fight, Aurelius observed, his tone carefully neutral. Such paradoxes are dangerous in the Imperium of man. Look, Dante said, straightening, I don't know much about your Imperium or its rules. Where I come from, I kill demons, protect humans, and occasionally save the world. The fact that I can tap into demonic power is just a family trait that comes in handy for the job. Before Aurelius could respond, a tech priest approached, his red robes scorched and torn, mechadendrites twitching with agitation. Lord Inquisitor, we have detected a new anomaly. The energy patterns match those recorded at the stranger's arrival. Dante perked up immediately. Another rift? Like the one that brought me here? The tech priest inclined his head in affirmation. The signatures are identical, though the scale is significantly larger. It appears to be forming in the ruins of the Prometheum refinery. Well then, Dante said, rising to his feet with renewed energy. Sounds like my ride home might be arriving. Aurelius's expression remained impassive, but his mind worked furiously behind that stoic facade. This being, this Dante, represented both immense potential and terrible risk. His power against the daemons was undeniable, a weapon that could serve the Imperium well in its eternal war against the ruinous powers. Yet that same power marked him as dangerous, potentially corrupting, and certainly beyond easy control. The Ordo Malleus would have significant interest in studying you, Aurelius said carefully. Your knowledge of daemonic entities and methods of combating them could prove invaluable to the Imperium's defense. Dante smiled, seeing through the diplomatic phrasing to the offer beneath. Thanks for the job opportunity, but I've got my own demon problems to deal with back home. Besides, he added with a wink, I work better as an independent contractor than part of a bureaucracy. No offense. The journey back to the ruined refinery was undertaken with caution. The devastation was even more extensive than Dante had initially imagined. Entire sectors of the underhive had collapsed, creating vast chasms where once stood the densely packed infrastructure of human habitation. Fires still raged unchecked in some areas, the local firefighting resources overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. At the epicenter, where the Prometheum refinery had once stood, nothing remained but a massive crater of fused metal and glass. The heat of the explosion had been so intense that ferrocrete had melted and re-solidified into flowing sculptures of industrial devastation. And at the center of this devastation, a new phenomenon was taking shape. It began as a pinprick of light, too bright to look at directly, hanging suspended above the crater floor. As they watched from a safe distance, the light expanded, forming a perfect circle that revealed glimpses of another reality beyond. The edges of this portal wavered and rippled like the surface of disturbed water, expanding and contracting in rhythmic pulses. The warp breach is stabilizing, the tech priest observed, his augmetic eyes whirring as they adjusted to the intense light. But the pattern is unlike any recorded warp phenomenon. It appears to be a controlled, directed aperture rather than a chaotic incursion. Dante nodded, recognition in his eyes. That's definitely my ticket home. Looks like someone on my side figured out how to punch a hole between dimensions after all. Aurelius regarded the portal with equal parts fascination and suspicion. If this truly leads to another reality rather than the warp itself, it represents a phenomenon unknown to Imperial science. Trust me, Dante said. You don't want to start regular interdimensional tourism. Every reality has its own brand of trouble, and mixing them together just multiplies the headaches. As he spoke, the portal pulsed more intensely, expanding to nearly 10 meters in diameter. Through its shimmering surface, indistinct figures could be seen moving on the other side, their forms distorted by the dimensional barrier. Time for me to go, Dante announced, adjusting what remained of his coat. It's been educational. Aurelius extended his hand, a gesture that seemed to surprise even him. The Imperium owes you a debt, Dante, whatever you are. You fought alongside us when you could have added to our troubles. Dante accepted the handshake with a firm grip. Next time you have a demon problem, try looking for the solution closer to home. Sometimes the best weapon against darkness is someone who understands it from the inside. He turned toward the portal, rebellion secure on his back, the twin pistols, ebony and ivory, holstered at his sides. With each step toward the dimensional gateway, his form seemed to grow more distinct, more real, as if he were returning to his proper place in the multiverse. At the very edge of the portal, he paused and looked back one final time at Ceralius and the assembled Imperial forces. With a theatrical bow and a flash of his trademark smirk, he offered a final quip. "If any of your Chaos Gods come knocking on my door, tell them to bring better party games next time." With that, he stepped through, his form dissolving into the blinding light. For a brief moment, the portal flared with impossible brightness, forcing all observers to shield their eyes. When they looked again, the gateway was shrinking rapidly, collapsing in on itself until it vanished with a sound like distant thunder. Inquisitor Ceralius stood in silence for several minutes, his augmetic eye recording every detail for later analysis and reports that would be sealed at the highest levels of Imperial authority. Finally, he turned to his remaining forces. "Purge the area," he ordered. "Full containment protocols. No mention of the stranger is to be made outside this unit, upon pain of execution." As his troops moved to comply, Ceralius cast one final glance at the empty space where the portal had been. In a galaxy beset by unrelenting darkness, where humanity clung to existence through dogma and sacrifice, he had glimpsed something both troubling and oddly hopeful. A being of dual nature, neither fully human nor completely daemon, yet choosing to fight against the darkness rather than succumb to it. Such paradoxes had no place in the rigid doctrine of the Imperium, yet the memory would remain with him, a private heresy carried in the heart of a faithful servant of the God Emperor. In the smoking ruins of Necromunda's underhive, life would eventually return. The hive city had endured worse catastrophes in its long, grim history. New structures would rise from the devastation. New souls would toil and suffer in the shadow of imperial industry. Few would remember the true nature of the destruction, and fewer still would know of the white-haired stranger who had briefly walked among them. But in the shadows between realities, in the infinite spaces that separated dimensions, something had changed. A connection had been forged, a pathway mapped, and in the ever-shifting currents of the warp, where time and space held no fixed meaning, the echoes of Dante's presence would remain, a ripple in the cosmic ocean that might yet return as a wave. On the other side of reality, in a world where demons wore different faces but harbored the same malevolence, Dante stepped from the portal into familiar surroundings. The Gothic architecture of his shop, Devil May Cry, welcomed him home with dusty comfort. Trophies of past hunts adorned the walls, testament to a lifetime spent battling the infernal. He shrugged off the remains of his coat, tossing it onto his desk before dropping into his chair and propping his boots up. A pizza box lay nearby, the contents long cold but still edible by his undemanding standards. "Hell of a trip," he murmured to himself, retrieving a slice. Even has the actual hell beat for Gothic aesthetics. As he chewed thoughtfully, his gaze drifted to Rebellion, propped against the wall where he had placed it. The blade seemed different somehow, as if it had absorbed something of the reality it had briefly visited. A faint energy clung to its edge, reminiscent of the warp powers it had tasted. Dante's expression grew serious for a moment, contemplating the implications. Then, true to form, the gravity passed, replaced by his customary smirk. "Next time," he declared to his empty shop, "I'm charging overtime for interdimensional demon slaying." Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky, as if in answer. The storm was coming, as it always did. But for now, the hunter rested, content in the knowledge that darkness had been pushed back once more, in this world and another. The battle eternal continued, across realities without end.